You know, there comes a moment in life when you look around and realize most people are settling. They settle for jobs they don't love, relationships that drain their spirit, and routines that rob them of their fire. They silence their own voice just to fit into a box society built for them. But deep down, something inside screams, "This isn't me. I'm not here to be average. Average is easy. Average requires no courage, no sacrifice, no vision." Average asks you to stay comfortable, to follow the crowd, to do just enough to get by. But let me tell you something. You weren't put on this earth to just get by. You weren't born to simply wake up, pay bills, and die. You were born to break through. You were born to create, to conquer, to live with intensity and passion. The moment you decide, "I ain't meant for average," everything changes, your standards rise, your actions shift. You stop tolerating mediocrity from yourself and from the world around you, and here's the truth. You don't get what you want in life, you get what you tolerate. If you tolerate being average, you'll live average. If you tolerate excuses, you'll build a life full of them. But when you raise your standard, when you demand more of yourself than anyone else ever could, suddenly your future expands. Think about it. Every extraordinary human being who's ever walked this planet had one thing in common. They refused to be average. They looked at the same challenges, the same obstacles, the same setbacks, and they said, "This will not break me, this will make me." They turned pain into fuel, fear into drive, and doubt into a weapon. And maybe right now, you're facing something that feels impossible. Maybe you've failed, maybe you've been rejected, maybe the world keeps telling you you're not enough. But listen to me, it's not the world's voice that defines you, it's yours. The moment you declare, "I ain't meant for average," you stop listening to those lies and you start writing your own story. It's not about being perfect. It's not about never falling. It's about refusing to stay down. It's about using every setback as a setup for a comeback. It's about demanding of yourself to grow, to push harder, to dream bigger, to live louder. Because the truth is, deep inside you, there's a giant waiting to be unleashed, and that giant does not settle for average. So from this moment forward, make a decision, a real decision, not a wish, not a hope, not a maybe. A decision that says, "I will no longer play small. I will no longer accept mediocrity. I will no longer bury the fire inside me. The world doesn't need another average life. It needs the real you, the bold you, the unstoppable you, because you and I both know it. You ain't meant for average. Average is easy, but greatness demands sacrifice, and that truth is what separates those who drift through life from those who carve their names into history. Because when you look at the word average, it represents comfort, it represents safety, it represents doing just enough to get by, and that's why so many people end up there, because it doesn't hurt, it doesn't stretch them, it doesn't require them to go beyond what they already know. But the reality is, if you're honest with yourself, moments you've been most alive, the moments you've grown the most, were never in the easy times. They were in the moments when you pushed past your limits, when you sacrificed your comfort, your sleep, your distractions, and your excuses for something bigger than yourself. And that is the price of greatness. It demands something from you that average will never ask for. It demands hunger, resilience, and the willingness to give up temporary ease for long-term fulfillment. Think about it. Every dream you carry inside of you has a cost. The dream of building a business, of changing your body, of mastering a craft, of becoming a leader, it all requires sacrifice. And the reason most people never taste that kind of greatness is because they want the reward without the cost. They want the result without the grind. They want the applause without the lonely nights when no one is watching. And yet that's the very path that leads to extraordinary, because greatness is born in silence, in those hours when you're doing what others refuse to do, when you're practicing longer, studying harder, training deeper, while the average person is scrolling, sleeping, or saying maybe tomorrow. Sacrifice is not punishment, it's an investment. It's the trade you make today to unlock the life you crave tomorrow. It's choosing discipline over distraction, focus over comfort, and vision over fear. And every time you choose that, every time you give up what feels easy for what is meaningful. You're telling the world and yourself that you're not settling for average. You're stepping into the arena where greatness is forged. And yes, it will test you, yes. It will break you down at times, yes. It will make you question whether it's worth it. But on the other side of that sacrifice is the version of you that average can never touch. Look at athletes who dominate their sport. Look at artists who move hearts across generations. Look at innovators who change the way the world lives. None of them got there by chance. They didn't wake up one day and fall into greatness. They sacrificed. They gave up comfort. They endured failure. They carried scars. And they paid the price every single day when no one was watching. And that's why when you see them win, when you see them celebrated, you're not just seeing talent. You're seeing years of sacrifice that most people were never willing to make. And that's why average will never produce greatness. Because average is about what's easy now, while greatness is about what's worth it later. But here's the part most people miss. Sacrifice doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's simply choosing to stay focused when your friends are out partying. Sometimes it's waking up an hour earlier to invest in yourself. Sometimes it's saying no to people who pull you down instead of push you forward. Sometimes it's shutting out the noise of doubt and negativity to stay true to your vision. And those small sacrifices, those quiet choices you make daily, compound into a life that separates you from the crowd, because greatness isn't built in one massive leap. It's built in countless small moments where you chose the hard path instead of the easy one. There's a voice inside you that already knows this, that knows you're not here to blend in, that knows you're not here to settle for average. That voice has been whispering to you in the quiet moments when you dream bigger, when you imagine a life that feels limitless. And that voice is telling you the truth, that if you want that life, if you want that freedom, if you want that power, then you must be willing to give up what's holding you back. You must be willing to sacrifice the comfort that chains most people to mediocrity. Because what you're called to create is bigger than the fear of sacrifice. And let me be real with you. Sacrifice is not glamorous. It doesn't always come with applause. In fact, it often comes with doubt, with loneliness, with people not understanding why you're doing what you're doing. But that's the price, that's the road less traveled, and those who stay the course, those who pay that price, those who give up the easy path for a meaningful one, they are the ones who rise. They are the ones who live a life that others look at and call extraordinary, not because they were lucky, not because they were chosen, but because they chose to sacrifice what was average for what was great. And when you really think about it, sacrifice is simply proof of how much you want something. If you want it bad enough, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. And average people are full of excuses, full of reasons why they can't, full of stories that keep them stuck. But greatness requires a different story, a story that says, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm willing to pay the price. I'm willing to let go of comfort today to live with freedom tomorrow. And when you start living that story, when you start making those sacrifices, you tap into a power that average will never know, because at the end of the day, average is cheap. It costs nothing, but it gives you nothing. Greatness is expensive. It costs everything, but it gives you everything. And you have to decide which price you're willing to pay, the price of regret or the price of sacrifice, because both will cost you, but only one will give you a life that sets your soul on fire. You don't get what you want, you get what you tolerate, and that is the foundation of every life ever built, because people spend years wanting, wishing, and hoping, but the truth is wanting alone changes nothing. It's what you're willing to tolerate that shapes your reality. If you tolerate excuses, you'll live a life full of them. If you tolerate being treated less than you deserve, then you'll keep accepting relationships that drain you. If you tolerate being average, you'll continue to stay stuck in mediocrity. The universe doesn't give you the life you fantasize about when you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling. It gives you the life you're willing to demand of yourself and fight when it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, and painful. And that's why this principle is so powerful, because it shifts the responsibility back onto you. It reminds you that the quality of your life is not built by what you hope for, but by what you allow. Think about it. Every area of your life right now is a reflection of what you've tolerated. Your body is a reflection of the standards you've held around health. Your finances are a reflection of what you've tolerated in terms of effort, risk, and discipline. Your relationships reflect the level of respect and love you've been willing to settle for. And when you finally look at your life through that lens, it becomes impossible to keep blaming the economy, your parents, your boss, or luck. Because deep down you know that your standards set the bar for everything you experience, and the moment you raise that bar, the moment you decide, I won't tolerate this anymore, life begins to shift. The danger is that tolerance sneaks in quietly. You don't notice it all at once. You don't wake up one day and say, I want to live beneath my potential. It happens slowly, the way dust gathers in a room. You let one excuse slide, then another. You let one negative habit creep in, then another. And before you know it, you've built a life around tolerating far less than you're capable of. But the same way that tolerance can pull you down, raising your standard can pull you up. When you stop tolerating weakness from yourself, you stop making excuses. When you stop tolerating toxic people, you free yourself for healthier connections. When you stop tolerating mediocrity, you unleash the hunger to create something extraordinary. And here's the truth. Most people don't fail because they aimed too high and missed. They fail because they aimed too low and hit. Because it's safer to tolerate small goals, safer to tolerate the comfort zone, safer to tolerate the familiar even when it's killing their spirit. But the people who create extraordinary lives are the ones who say, I will no longer tolerate average. And from that moment, they raise their standards, and their standards shape their behavior, and their behavior creates momentum, and momentum builds a life that matches the new standard, because life will always give you what you demand, not what you daydream about. So when you look at your dreams, the question isn't, do I want this? Of course you do. The question is, what will I no longer tolerate that's been holding me back? Will you tolerate waking up every day exhausted because you won't discipline your schedule? Will you tolerate a paycheck that doesn't reflect your value because you won't demand more of yourself? Will you tolerate staying stuck in the same patterns because you won't sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term growth? Because if you continue to tolerate those things, you'll keep living at that level. But the second you say, I refuse to accept this anymore, you create a line in the sand that forces you to rise. And it's not about anger or negativity. It's about clarity. It's about drawing boundaries. It's about knowing your worth and acting like it. Because life doesn't negotiate with wishful thinking. It negotiates with standards, and your standards are communicated by what you tolerate. You can say you want respect, but if you tolerate disrespect, you'll never have it. You can say you want wealth, but if you tolerate laziness, you'll never reach it. You can say you want growth, but if you tolerate excuses, you'll stay stuck. And until you align your standards with your actions, you'll always live in the gap between what you want and what you're actually experiencing. There's a reason why the most successful people are often described as relentless, because they do not tolerate mediocrity. They do not tolerate excuses. They do not tolerate the voice in their head that says good enough. They set standards so high that average can't breathe in their presence, and because of that, their results reflect their discipline, their focus, their refusal to compromise. And it's not that they're lucky. It's not that they're chosen. It's that they've decided to stop tolerating the things that keep others trapped. They've declared, I demand more of myself than anyone else ever could. And that declaration transforms the course of their lives. But let's make this real, because this isn't just philosophy. Think about your own life. Think about the areas where you've been frustrated. Chances are the frustration comes not because you don't know what you want, but because you've been tolerating the gap between who you are and who you could be, tolerating procrastination, tolerating distraction, tolerating the comfort of saying tomorrow instead of today. And the moment you stop tolerating that, you'll find the energy, the courage, the urgency to move, because nothing changes until you get sick of your own excuses, until you look in the mirror and say, I will not live like this anymore. And the beauty is that you don't have to wait for some dramatic moment. You don't have to hit rock bottom. You don't have to beg for permission. You just need to decide right here, right now, that you're raising your standards, that you're no longer tolerating what's been keeping you small, that you're going to align your actions with your vision, because that's the day your life begins to shift. And while the world may still see the same person on the outside, inside you'll know something unshakable has changed, because the line has been drawn, the tolerance has ended, and the path extraordinary has begun. Every setback is fuel for a stronger comeback, and that truth is the difference between people who get crushed by life and people who rise from it with power in their eyes and fire in their hearts. Because setbacks are not signs that you are finished, they are invitations to grow. They are challenges designed to test whether you really want what you say you want. They are the universe's way of asking if you are willing to fight through pain, disappointment, and failure to claim the life you dream of. And the reason this principle is so powerful is because the moments you've been knocked down are the very moments that give you the strength, resilience, and hunger that success requires. Nobody builds character in comfort. Character is forged in the storms, in the battles, in the nights where you wonder if you'll ever get back up. Think about the last time you failed, the last time you poured everything into something only to watch it collapse. The heartbreak, the rejection, the defeat, the embarrassment, and yet here you are, still breathing, still alive, and maybe you don't see it yet. But that experience gave you something average people never develop. It gave you endurance. It gave you perspective. It gave you wisdom, because you cannot learn strength by winning all the time. You cannot discover courage if you've never been afraid. You cannot taste the joy of victory if you've never had to swallow the bitterness of defeat. And every single setback you've endured is like fuel sitting in your tank waiting to be ignited. The difference is how you use it. Some people take their setbacks and use them as excuses. They let the pain define them. They tell themselves stories about why they can't, why they're not good enough, why they should stop trying, and those stories keep them trapped in mediocrity. But the people who refuse to settle, the people who rise, take that same setback and flip it. They say, "This pain will not break me, it will build me." They say, "I will not let this defeat define me, I will let it refine me." They turn every cut into a scar that tells a story of survival, every failure into a lesson that sharpens their vision, every fall into the foundation for their comeback. And because of that, they become unstoppable when you look at the greatest leaders, athletes, creators, or innovators in history. What you're really looking at are people who endured setbacks that would have destroyed most. You're looking at rejection letters, bankruptcies, injuries, betrayals, humiliations, nights of doubt. And yet they rose anyway. They didn't avoid setbacks. They embraced them. They took the blows and kept moving, and every time they came back stronger, sharper, hungrier, more dangerous, because once you survive the fire, you no longer fear the flames, and once you realize you can fall and rise again, you no longer fear falling, and maybe right now you're in the middle of one of those setbacks. Maybe life has knocked the wind out of you. Maybe you've lost something or someone you thought you couldn't live without. Maybe your plans have fallen apart, and it feels like you're stuck at the bottom. But listen carefully. The bottom is not the end. The bottom is the beginning. Bottom is where comebacks are born. The bottom is where you discover who you really are. Because when you've lost everything you thought you needed and you're still alive, you realize that the power was never in the things you lost. The power has always been inside you, waiting to be awakened. Setbacks strip away the illusions. They tear down the walls. They expose the excuses. They leave you with nothing but the raw truth. And in that raw truth, you find out how much fight you really have, how much faith you really carry, how much hunger still burns inside, and that hunger is the very thing that makes the comeback possible, because when you've suffered, when you've tasted defeat, when you've felt the pain of hitting the ground, you develop a fire that those who have only known comfort will never understand. You learn to appreciate progress. You learn to respect the grind. You learn to value every victory, no matter how small, and that perspective is priceless. Every comeback story begins with a choice. The choice to not stay down, the choice to use the pain instead of running from it, the choice to rise even when you don't feel ready, and the moment you make that choice, you take back your power, you reclaim the pen to write your own story, because setbacks are just chapters. They are not the ending. The ending is written when you decide it's written, and until you declare it over, you still have another move, another chance, another shot. And that is what makes you unstoppable. And let's be clear, a comeback isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about showing yourself that you can survive more than you thought you could, that you can grow deeper roots than you ever imagined, that you can rise from ashes stronger than before, because every time you come back, every time you rebuild, every time you rise, you send a message not just to the world but to your own soul. A message that says, I am not fragile, I am not finished, I am unbreakable. So when you think about setbacks, don't think of them as barriers, think of them as building blocks. Don't think of them as endings, think of them as beginnings. Don't think of them as failures, think of them as fuel, because that fuel, when ignited by your determination, your resilience, and your refusal to quit, becomes the very power that propels you toward your comeback. And the greater the setback, the greater the comeback, because the deeper the valley, the higher the mountain you're about to climb, and the stronger you'll be when you reach the top. Refuse to settle. Raise your standards, and your life will rise with them, because every single result you have today is tied directly to the standards you've set for yourself. The level you've decided is acceptable, the line you've drawn for what you will or won't allow. And when people look at their lives and feel frustrated, it's usually because deep down they know they've settled. They've lowered their standards to match the comfort of the crowd instead of raising them to meet the vision inside of them. And here's the truth. When you raise your standards, you force yourself into growth. You force yourself to leave behind the version of you that was willing to accept less. You force yourself to demand more from your energy, your discipline, your relationships, and your future. And life has no choice but to rise to meet that demand. The danger is that settling feels safe. It feels familiar. It feels easy, because settling tells you this is good enough. It tells you to be grateful for scraps instead of fighting for abundance. It tells you to be comfortable where you are instead of reaching for what you could become. But the problem with settling is that it kills the fire inside of you. It robs you of possibility. It keeps you locked in cycles of mediocrity while your potential sits untapped. And the longer you settle, the more you convince yourself that this is all there is. But that is a lie, because the moment you stop settling, the moment you decide that what once was acceptable is no longer acceptable, that's the moment everything shifts, because standards are magnetic. They pull your actions up to match them. They shape the people you attract. They decide the opportunities you allow into your life when you refuse to settle. You start to see how much more you're capable of, because human beings will always live down to the expectations they tolerate, but they'll also rise to the expectations they demand. And this is why raising your standards isn't just a motivational phrase. It's a strategy for transformation. If you raise your standard for your health, suddenly excuses around food and exercise no longer have the same power. If you raise your standard for your income, suddenly laziness and distraction are replaced with resourcefulness and drive. If you raise your standard for relationships, suddenly the toxic connections fall away because they no longer meet the level you require, and little by little, your life reshapes itself to match the new standard. Think about it. Everything you admire in extraordinary people comes down to standards. Champions in any field aren't just talented, they hold themselves to standards that average people won't. Leaders who inspire aren't just lucky, they demand more of themselves in integrity, vision, and action. Creators who leave a legacy aren't just gifted, they set standards for their craft so high that mediocrity could never survive in their presence. And the same is true for you. The moment you raise your standard, the moment you draw a line and say, this is the minimum I accept from myself and nothing less, you activate a new level of energy that cannot coexist with settling. And here's what most people misunderstand. Raising your standards doesn't mean being arrogant. It doesn't mean being ungrateful. It means being unwilling to betray your potential. It means being unwilling to live a life of compromise when you know you're capable of more. It means honoring the greatness that's inside you instead of suffocating it to fit the mold of average. And when you live this way, you don't just change your own life. You give others permission to do the same, because people see your standards. They feel your energy, and they're either forced to rise with you or they fall away. And either way, your environment begins to match the life you're building. Settling always whispers, be realistic. Settling always whispers, don't aim too high. Settling always whispers you're asking for too much. But what it's really doing is protecting comfort, and comfort is the silent killer of dreams, because comfort tells you to stay small, to avoid risk, to avoid growth, and before you know it, years pass and you realize you've lived the same year over and over, repeating routines that keep you in same place. But when you refuse to settle, you break that cycle. You demand more out of your days, more out of your effort, more out of your impact, and life responds to that demand, because what you consistently require of yourself eventually becomes who you are. Raising your standards is not about waiting for the perfect moment. It's not about waiting until you feel ready. It's about making the decision now, even when it feels uncomfortable, because that discomfort is proof that you're stepping beyond the old limits, that you're stretching into growth, and every time you do that, every time you say, this is no longer enough, you elevate not just what you do, but who you become. And the higher your standards, the higher your results, not because life is easier, but because you're no longer willing to accept anything less than the level you've chosen. There's a power that comes when you look in the mirror and declare that the old version of you who tolerated excuses, who tolerated weakness, who tolerated mediocrity is gone, and that from this moment forward you're setting a new bar, and once that bar is set you cannot go back, because to go back would mean betraying yourself. And when you truly commit to that higher standard, when you burn the bridge to settling, you unleash a force inside of you that no obstacle can contain, because your standard has become your identity. And once something becomes your identity, it becomes automatic. It becomes the default level you live at, and life rises to meet it. The world doesn't need another average life. It needs the unstoppable you, because there are billions of people on this planet who live and die without ever waking up to who they really are. Billions who follow the same patterns, the same routines, the same expectations that were handed to them. And because of that, their light never shines, their potential never awakens, their voice never gets heard. But you were not put here to be another copy of average. You were not put here to blend in with the background. You were put here to bring something unique, something fierce, something only you can give, and the world is starving for that. The world is not short on mediocrity, it's overflowing with it. What it is desperate for are people who refuse to settle, people who live with conviction, people who break barriers, people who decide to be unstoppable. Unstoppable doesn't mean you never fall, it doesn't mean you never doubt, it doesn't mean you never face fear. Unstoppable means you rise every single time. Unstoppable means you carry a fire that refuses to be put out. Unstoppable means you keep moving even when the world tells you no, and that is what the world needs. Because every breakthrough in history came from someone who refused to live an average life. Every invention, every revolution, every piece of art that moved generations, every act of courage that shifted the direction of humanity, it all came from people who decided that average was not enough, that ordinary was not acceptable, that they were called to bring forth the extraordinary, and the same potential lives inside you, but average is seductive. Average whispers that it's safer to follow the crowd. Average tells you not to make too much noise, not to risk too much, not to stand out much. Average makes you believe that staying comfortable is the same thing as living, but deep down you know it isn't, because when you're honest with yourself, comfort feels like a cage, average feels like suffocation, and the reason is simple. Your spirit wasn't designed for average. Your soul wasn't built to shrink. It was built to expand, to create, to fight, to grow. And when you deny that, when you settle, you start to feel empty inside, not because you're missing something from the outside, but because you're ignoring something burning on the inside. The unstoppable version of you is not some fantasy, it's already there. It's the part of you that dreams bigger when the world tells you to be realistic. It's the part of you that keeps imagining a better life even after you've failed. It's the part of you that refuses to die quietly no matter how many times you've been knocked down, and the more you tap into that, the more the world around you begins to shift, because people can feel when someone is living with unstoppable energy. They can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice, feel it in your presence, and it inspires them to rise as well, because unstoppable is contagious, and when you live that way, you're not just changing your own life, you're creating a ripple effect that touches everyone around you, and make no mistake. Being unstoppable doesn't mean life will suddenly get easier. In fact, it often gets harder, because you're no longer playing small. You're no longer hiding in the shadows. You're stepping into arenas that test you, challenge you, and stretch you. But that's the point, because those arenas are where greatness is born. Those arenas are where unstoppable people are forged, and every challenge you face there, every setback, every doubt, every obstacle becomes proof that you are alive, proof that you're moving, proof that you are not settling for the prison of average. The world needs the unstoppable you, because there are people waiting for your voice, waiting for your example, waiting for your courage. You may not even realize it, but someone out there will look at your life and say, because they didn't quit, I won't quit either. Someone will see your fight and find their own strength. Someone will witness your refusal to settle and be reminded of their own potential. And that is the gift you give when you step into the unstoppable version of yourself. You stop living only for your own survival, and you start living as a beacon for others, and that is how legacies are built. What most people call impossible is often just untapped potential. What most people call unrealistic is just fear disguised as logic. What most people call average is simply surrender. But you are not here to surrender, you are here to stand. You are here to fight, you are here to live fully, and that requires stepping out of average and into unstoppable. And once you make that shift, once you declare that nothing will stop you, not rejection, not fear, not failure, not doubt, then life begins to open doors that average people will never see. Opportunities appear because you have the eyes to see them, and the courage to seize them. The unstoppable you is not a future version waiting for the right moment. The unstoppable you is a decision. It's a state of being. It's a standard you set right now. It's when you decide that nothing external will determine your destiny. It's when you choose to trust your vision more than the noise around you. It's when you commit to getting up every time you fall, because if you rise one more time than you fall, you are unstoppable. And when you live that way, when you embody that, you become proof that the human spirit is stronger than circumstances, stronger than doubt, stronger than average, and that's why the world doesn't need another life that settles. It doesn't need another story of untapped potential. It doesn't need another person who buried their dreams because of fear. What it needs is the unstoppable you, the version of you that refuses to play small, the version of you that will not quit, the version of you that burns so brightly that it forces others to confront their own greatness. Because when you live that way, you do more than change your own life. You change the world around you, and that is the reason you are here.